background is actually I wanted to be a pop star. It didn't happen, but I tried really hard for many, many years. Turns out trying to be a pop star is really hard. And actually, getting paid for trying to be a pop star doesn't really happen. So I drifted into medical statistics just because I needed a plan B when the pop stardom didn't happen. So my relationship to numbers is that I'm a mathematician on the one hand. So I like numbers, I like mathematics and trying to understand the world through numbers and maths. But then on the other hand, I come from the side of pop culture and arts, and where numbers doesn't necessarily work that well. So when can we use numbers to understand the world, and when does it not apply? That's one of the things that I'm really, really concerned with. And why do pre-hospital RCTs rarely change our practice? Well, comes down to math, really. And I'll try to walk you through all of this math in an understandable, relatable way. The way it sort of occurred to me after having worked in this field for many, many years. Now, an RCT is a randomized controlled trial. It's the gold standard of medical research. And we talk about it as the gold standard as if it's just pure gold, just lying there all the time. But there's some things that those letters hide that we really have to think about. Now, an RCT is a controlled experiment. It's a controlled experiment. It means that we control the situation rather than the situation controlling us. So we set up something where we control everything. That's the whole point of it. And by doing the randomization part of it, it allows us to generalize findings beyond that actual experiment. So the control part, the C part, says that we have the control. The randomization part means that we can generalize it beyond where we're standing. And this is the crucial thing. It means that we can quantify effect. Does the thing that we're doing actually affect the world, and by how much? And this latter part is the reason why it's so, magnetic in a way. Being able to say that something has an effect and how big an effect it has on the real world. But an RCT, an experiment that can assess causality, well, it's just not an experiment. It is a quantitative experiment. It means that we are in the domain of numbers. And while that sounds like a great thing, it means that the output from this RCT actually is purely dependent on the inputs of the RCT. It means that the numbers that we enter into the RCT will define whether the output of it is well. And that means that the idea of a number must be meaningful. It has to mean that the number we attach to something is actually a meaningful representation of the thing that we're trying to assess. And while something can be, properly quantified, some things cannot, right? Because quantifying something means that we either measure it or we count it. That means we have a measuring apparatus. We measure weights, height, using scales or machines in a way or another. Those are objective measurements. That's mathematics and theoretical physics and that beautiful part of it. And the counting things means that we have defined categories. We humans have defined categories in the world that we try to count. But what happens? What happens if the numbers that we enter aren't all that good? Now, it's funny when I talk to people and I say that I'm a statistician and we use computers, and everyone's like, oh, yeah, if you just have the numbers, you can just make the computer find the answer. But a computer doesn't find anything, right? A computer does what you tell it to do. A computer is a math machine. That's what it is. You enter numbers, and the machines, runs through those numbers in a pre-specified way using mathematical equations. That's what statistics is. And there's an output. And if the numbers aren't all that good, there's no math in the world that can save those numbers and create a great output. And if the math is wrong, well, the best numbers in the world will be destroyed by the wrong math and create false outputs. So the fact that we use numbers and math in a machine to create an output means that there are several crucial steps where things can go wrong. Can go wrong on the number side, can go wrong on the math side in the computer. And in particular, the numbers side has always been interesting to me because when I when I started studying mathematics. And in mathematics, numbers are beautiful, right? Seven is just seven. It's not seven of anything, it's just seven. It just is. And then we design mathematics and we create it from the ground up. And the mathematics tells you what you can and what you cannot do with these numbers. You can add them and multiply them and move them around in specific ways. And it's either right or it's wrong. Everything that's not right is wrong. It is beautiful. It does not exist though. It's something man-made, something we created. You cannot look into a rock and find mathematics lying there. We have invented it. It's like a game that we have created. Looks beautiful, but does not exist. And after I did my PhD in mathematics, I moved on to work in the petroleum engineering industry in Norway for a while, the natural sciences. And the natural sciences and technology are beautiful in the sense that there are tons of numbers, and we always have the numbers we need, right? We measure the distance to the bottom of the ocean. We measure how long it takes for a car to drive from here to there. We measure how much the moon weighs. All of the numbers that we're measuring and that we're finding are exactly the numbers we're looking for. And right beside us is the math. And the math is either correct or is wrong. And we use this correct or wrong math on the perfect numbers that we have measured on exactly the thing we're looking for. And now we can land on Mars on our first attempts. It is beautiful. And this is the reason why numbers and mathematics has become, the great thing it has. Natural sciences technology, it rules the world because of this beautiful companionship between numbers and mathematics. But then to me, the mathematics and the physics, it was too beautiful. I needed something more dirty. I like dirty things. And I ended up in the life science and medicine. And there we also had a lot of numbers. But it dawned on me after a while that the numbers that we have aren't really the numbers that we're looking for. Tons of numbers, but they're just circumstantial evidence. When I measure someone's body core temperature, I'm not really interested in that person's body temperature. My question is he ill? And the answer is 39.7. But that's not the answer to my question. The question is he ill? But then I measure the temperature and I get a number, but the number is just circumstantial evidence. Maybe, maybe not. If I measure someone's BMI, the body mass index, my question is not what is the body mass index, really. The question is this person too big? It might need help from the healthcare system. And then the answer is 22.7. That wasn't the answer to my question, but still, there's a number. So the numbers in medicine and life sciences, there's a lot of them, but very often it's not the numbers that we're looking for. But they seem so trustworthy, and we have the math, the correct math, just lying there beside us. So we take the correct math and we use it on these numbers that aren't really the numbers we're looking for, but it seems okay. We get some results and it feels natural science-ish, and we just keep going. But there's something off already. And then I moved all the way into health sciences and public health, and all hell broke loose. Because all of a sudden, there are tons of things that we just can't measure. I work at a faculty where we educate nurses. They are incredibly concerned with caring. But there is no ruler that can measure caring, right? We know it matters. We know people like it, but we don't know really what it is, and we can't attach a number to it. We still like numbers, so we try to figure out how we can get hold of numbers, but it turns out that tons of things that we're looking for are unmeasurable. I mean, maybe your friends like to party. So you party as well because you like to hang out with your friends, and they drink too much, so you end up drinking too much. Because you drink too much, you have poor eating habits because you eat some junk food on your way home from a club 2 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday, right? So you're all of a sudden your friends' lifestyle choices will affect your health. But how do I quantify a lifestyle choice? And clearly, some friends are more important to you than others. And you have an emotional connection with your mother that will affect your health, but I don't know how to measure the emotional distance to your mother. There is no such ruler, and we will likely never find one. So the whole idea of numbers is just, doesn't really work anymore. And then you move all the way to social sciences and science communication that I've been doing for a while, and numbers don't mean anything. Maths and experiments don't mean anything. I can take an award-winning director, super popular actors, best screenwriters in the world at the time, and the movie they make might still suck, right? I can optimize whatever I want, but the output might be wrong. So here we are, different fields where numbers are more or less valid. On the math side of it, the numbers are very, very meaningful. But the further away I get from the math side into the health side and the social science side, numbers become less and less meaningful. So numbers in themselves, the input to the randomized controlled trial, aren't necessarily meaningful, so the output might not be that meaningful. The first thing. Even if we have numbers, we have to acknowledge the fact that we have numbers measuring people. And a huge problem with people when we talk about numbers is the variation between people is really, really huge. So the variation in the numbers that we have is really, really huge. I mean, the variation between humans is one of the reasons to human success on the planet Earth. Large variation in our body composition and our genetics means that we will adapt to almost anything. Cold, hot, big, small, whatever, humans will adapt. Means that whatever you measure in humans, variation will be huge. And huge variation means that it's really, really hard to say something about humans as such because we're so different. And it affects the math in it quite a bit. And the thing is that this problem doesn't really exist in the natural sciences. Variation in the natural sciences exists, but it's really, really small. The variation in measurements in natural sciences is so small that it took hundreds of years before the natural scientists even realized that variation was there. Newton's equations for gravity, universal gravity, laws of nature, they were developed assuming there was no variation whatsoever. And when they measured things, variation seemed to, back up that view. And you see that in the way that we approach phenomena in the natural sciences. I mean, have you seen those videos online where they're trying to, show is a Tesla faster than a Ferrari, right? Then you have one Ferrari and you have one Tesla up against one another, and they just race, right? And one of them, wins the race. And then there you have it. The Tesla is faster than the Ferrari, but that's using n equals 1. I mean, it would never happen on a TV show, comparing these things, that you would have 25 Teslas and 25 Ferraris because the variation within the cars would be so huge that you couldn't really assess which car was faster. No, variation is so small that you can truly assess which car is faster than the other. And the natural sciences, if you measure a rock and it weighs 2 kilos and you measure another rock and it weighs 1.7 kilos, well, this rock is heavier than that rock. Done. And that's how we relate to numbers in natural sciences. I mean, there's no saying that it will happen like in 20 out of 25 patients, this will be a good thing. I mean, if I want a new car, I mean, my neighbor just bought a new car and he's really, really fast, and I hate my neighbor and I want a car that's faster than his car. So I go to the car dealer and I'm like, I want a car that's faster than his car. And the car dealer goes, you know what? I can sell you this car. It will be faster than the other car in 6 out of 10 times. So 6 out of 10 times you race that other car that your neighbor owns, you will win. So it's a better car. And you're like, no way I'm buying that car. No way I'm buying that car. I want a car that's better every single time. That's how we do it in natural sciences. In health sciences, variation is so low, so high between individuals that we're fine. We're saying, you know what? I'll give this drug to these people, and 6 out of 10 times it might work. 4 out of 10 it might not work. It's more than 50-50. I'm happy, right? That's how we relate to things. It's so weird that we're fine with this. And the large randomized controlled trials in health sciences and pre-hospital critical care, they're designed so that we don't even have 10 people. We have 100 people in each RCT. Maybe an RCT in itself is enough. We need to do meta-analysis where we combine many randomized controlled trials and in a combined number of thousands of people. And if you have 1,000 people, then this drug will likely be better than this. And we're like, super, RCTs told us that this is better than that. But come on, effects are minuscule. People vary too much. So the variation between humans make randomized controlled trials harder to sort of value as much as we would. Now, the randomized controlled trial is an experiment, and experiments are at the heart of science. I love experiments. A good randomized controlled trial, a good experiment, that's where science really, stands out. People out in the real world don't do experiments. They just guess and they have opinions and they point to, examples. My mother did this and my dad did that. I have a friend who did this and that. We do proper experiments. And the history of experimentation is really, really long. Now, the first noted experiment in the social sciences is from 600 years before zero. It was in old Egypt. Now, it was Pharaoh Samtic, I think, who ruled at the moment. He is a ruler at the time where Egypt had been like the great nation of all, but they were in decline, trying to build themselves back up. So they looked back into history, trying to rebuild their self-esteem, looked into their previous gloriousness. And they were proud people. They were like, we are the original people. We're the first people there is, most likely. Because there was another contestant. There was another ancient people up in the region, which is now called Turkey. It might be as old or even older than the Egyptians. So Pharaoh Samtic, he was a proper soul, natural scientist at heart, and he was like, we can assume and guess that we Egyptians, we are the oldest, most natural people in the world. We came first, or maybe we're not. Let's create an experiment. And his idea was that the original people would talk the original language of humans. So what is the original language? Is it Egyptian or is it something else? So what he did was he took two small kids, newborn infants, away from their mother, placed them in a small cottage with a sheep farmer, sheep farmer, shepherd. And he said to the shepherd that he was not allowed to talk to the kids, interact with the kids whatsoever. They were just to be left on their own. He could feed them, that was it. But they would just have to, figure everything out for themselves, including language. And his idea was that these kids, when they started talking, they would talk the natural language of humans. And hopefully that would be the Egyptian language. A year went by, 2 years went by, the kids didn't say anything, and they eventually learned to walk, didn't talk, and then all of a sudden, one day when the shepherd entered this cottage, the kids came running toward him, and they said this word, bekos. They were talking, and he hadn't heard this word before, but now they were talking. So he brought the children to Pharaoh Samtic, said, here, listen to them. And the children said bekos, and the Pharaoh had never heard the word before. He called for his advisors, and they said that they know this word. It is the word for bread, but not in Egyptian, but in the language of the Phrygians who live now in Turkey. So, sorry. Turns out that maybe the natural language is not Egyptian, but Phrygian, and we Egyptians are not the first and original people. Bummer. But proper experiments. It's later been called the forbidden experiment because it's ethically somewhat dodgy. would not pass an ethics committee today. But also begs the question, does the experiment really answer the question? What is the natural language? And does even measuring the natural language decide who's the original people on planet Earth? Experiments might look really experiment-ish, but do they answer the question? Is the design of the experiment actually what we need? Because there's something happens when we experiment with people. When you experiment with dead things, that's what natural scientists do. They experiment with dead things. It's really easy because I can take the same little, wooden ball and I can drop it from the same distance 1,000 times. I can measure the length. I can measure how long it takes for this little wooden ball to drop. And I can deduce a lot of things related to gravity and speed and acceleration based on this. It's a good thing being a natural scientist. But if I replace that wooden ball with a human being, just dropping 1,000 human beings from the same height to measure the impact of falling on the human body, something happens, besides ethics, of course, because humans will, fall differently. Their body will be affected differently depending on who it is. And if I try to drop the same person 100 times from the same heights, that person will be broken and bruised and will respond differently to the same treatment. And I cannot even give him first the treatment and then not give him the treatment. I can first drop him and then not drop him afterwards because I already did. So there's something about experimenting with humans that causes tons of problems that natural scientists don't have. The thing is, we are entering from the domain of natural sciences into the domain of health. Many things happen along the way. And one of the things that happen along the way is how simple things are or not. And here we have to clarify the difference between complicated and complex. We tend to talk about it as being the same thing, but they are fundamentally different. Things that are complicated, they're hard, right? They're really, really hard. But if you follow a specific recipe, you will end up with the right answer. Mathematics is maybe the hardest thing there is, but there's a right way of doing it. Every step might be really, really hard, but you end up with the right answer. You have 2 lines underneath the answer. It's correct. These things are the complicated ones. Landing on Mars is complicated. But if you do it, the process in the right way, tick, 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 you will end up on Mars. Fine. Complex problems, on the other hand, are completely different beasts. They involve too many unknowns, and they're related in such a way that it's really, really hard to figure out what happens when and what affects what. This is a pandemic, right? Everyone knew that viruses, if I have the virus, you might get it, and he might get it, and she might get it. So the best thing there is actually to, keep people separated. Maybe teenagers, right? They tend to be on top of one another a lot. So if you just, say that like we did in Norway, teenagers can't go to school, let's keep them at home. And all of a sudden we have a generation full of teenagers with mental health problems. That wasn't the point. That was not what we wanted, but that was what happened when we did that thing, right? Or maybe as we did in Norway as well, maybe we want adults not to mingle too much either. So we close down the bars and the cafes and the restaurants. And all of a sudden, people who run bars lose their jobs. They have to sell their house. They get divorced. They beat up their kids. That wasn't the plan either. But that's what happened. There's a fundamental difference between complicated and complex. And the thing is, in the complicated universe, individual factors will affect something else directly. And you know exactly what will affect what. In a complex problem, you don't know exactly what will affect something else. There are so many things affecting one another at the same time that just picking out these 2 things here and looking at them, doesn't really make that much sense because there's too many other unknowns involved. RCTs work wonders in the complicated world, but in a complex world, problems that are complex, they aren't really that meaningful. And we get blinded by this because we tell stories to one another from medical research and medical statistics that make us forget this difference between complicated and complex. Now, in about, how much is it, 250 years ago, when James Lind, he was a medical doctor on board a ship, large ship that was sailing, across the huge oceans, 17 something, 87, don't remember, something like that. And this was at the time where a lot of sailors, they got scurvy, right? They were traveling for so long without fresh food and fresh water or fresh anything, had scurvy, a brutal disease. There were several ideas of what could cure scurvy. So what James Lind did at one expedition they were with his huge boat, this huge vessel, he took, a handful of people who had scurvy, handful of sailors, placed them, beside one another in one part of the boat so that they would be in the same place, so the surroundings would be similar, and pair them up, two in one group, two in another group, two in a third group, two in a fourth group. And then he gave the two people in each group different things to eat, different things to put in the body. One group, they were given lime, one group were given some weird stuff that they had cooked up in some medical facility in London, some got blah, blah, blah. Different things that they were given. And then just after a couple of days, the two guys who were given limes to eat, they were well. Awesome. Fantastic. Turns out that lime cures scurvy. It was a marvel to behold. The problem, of course, is that this is just a complicated problem. Lime cures scurvy. It's a one-to-one association. It's difficult when you don't know it, but when you know it, it's actually just it's an easy thing to do. But if you move away from scurvy to something more complex than that, maybe you say, let's talk about food and health. I mean, is it so that if you just eat lime, it will cure any disease? No, it won't. With other types of lime cure the same disease? Probably. What about spaghetti? Is that a good thing? How much spaghetti can you have? It depends on if you eat a lot of pasta, different types of pasta, or I don't know, uh, porridge. Is porridge good? How much porridge is good? How much salad? How much fruit? I mean, just the idea of finding an optimal food for your health, we don't know how to do it. It depends on too many factors that we can just pin it down to this is what you should eat. We don't know how to do it. The worlds of Lyme and experimentation medicine is for the complicated problems, works wonders. For complex issues, the whole idea of finding the optimal solution just doesn't really work. And this boils down to the fact of orthogonality. Are the factors independently important in themselves, or does it depend on everything else? Orthogonality is a concept from mathematics. I mean, if I want to have a new suit and I measure my body, I went online to figure out how do you order a suit. It turns out you have to measure how much, 17 different things in your body, your arm length and your chest and your neck and various things. So 17 measurements. And these measurements are independent. I can have long legs and short arms. I could have a huge neck if I exercise a lot, but still my feet can be kind of small. So all of these 17 measurements that make up this suit is independent of one another. It's orthogonal. And you see that again for example, in a helicopter. It means that all the directions in space are independent of one another. It's what happens in three-dimensional space in physics, right? Back and forth, right, left, up and down. This is what happens to a helicopter. I can go back and forth as much as I want to, but it won't get me off the ground because the off the ground factor, the Z factor, is different from left, right, back and forth, right? And a lot of problems in physics and the natural sciences are exactly like that. I can take a huge three-dimensional, high-dimensional problem, and I can tear it down into smaller pieces, right, left, back, forth, up, down, or the suit, decompose it into small problems, solve those smaller problems independently, and glue them back together. That's when RCTs work wonders. When you look at the human body, though, it's not easy to say that factors are independent of one another. Is the heart independent of the lungs? Well, of course, if the heart doesn't pump, I need to do something about it. And if the kidneys don't work, I need to do something about it. But the kidneys work in relation to the rest of the body, and so does the intestines and my blood and my breathing and everything. It works together. And saying that this thing here in the human body is independent of everything else doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. I know a virus will affect certain parts of my body, but is that thing independent of everything else? Can I look at nutrition value independent of exercise? Can I look at exercise and nutrition independent of drinking habits and your friends' lifestyle choices? Probably not. So the idea of mathematical independence, orthogonality, just collapses. So to sum it up, what did I say? Randomized controlled trial. It's a quantitative experiment that can assess causality. But just the idea of quantitative and experiments, well, it comes with a lot of problems. It comes down to math. And the fun thing is, when I summarize this math now, clinicians will know this instinctively already. They know that this is the way it is. They just didn't know that it was math. So on the one hand, we have numbers. The closer you are to the math side of the world, natural sciences, technology, the more meaningful numbers are in themselves. That's the input to the statistics. And the further you get away from that into public health and social sciences and complex problems, numbers are less meaningful. Variation is low, then makes math and statistics much, much easier. And the further you move away from mathematics and the natural sciences into life sciences, medicine, and health, then variation increases, variation becomes larger, and becomes much, much harder to figure out what is related to what and what's different from something else. Complicated versus complex. Taking out individual factors and looking at just the associations between A and B is really easy in a complicated problem, but it's not really meaningful in a complex problem because everything's related to everything else. And then finally, the whole point of RCTs is that factors are orthogonal and independent of one another. That's why we give people a certain drug to cure headaches. Everyone can use this drug, this pill. But on the other hand, sometimes they're not. And in those problems, just figuring out that this thing affects this one, it's not independent. It depends on everything else, right? So mathematics tells us that randomized controlled trials will be very valuable for certain types of problems, but less valuable for different types of problems. And the problem with health science and health research is that it spans a huge part of this field. Parts of it is natural sciences, parts of it is social science. And it's really easy when you're in pre-hospital critical care to be blinded by the thing that, in medicine, we do randomized controlled trials. Yes, but randomized controlled trials in medicine, clinical medicine, they're closer to the natural science part. And that's where numbers and math and randomized controlled trials make sense. But when you move away from that, it makes a lot less sense. And because of that, randomized controlled trials in pre-hospital critical care rarely change our clinical practice. It's because of math, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. That really was excellent. Is it all right if we have some